box has a brand new pack of cards. Let's see what's inside.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are doing another pack opening, this time of the Brotherhood without banners. Starting us off, we have Sansa's Maid. I've seen this card before. It can be deadly. It's a companion, so you can search it with Streets of Silk, and it's a bestow card. It's not like a begging brother type of bestow card where like all the gold that you put on it is like ammo that you can use turn after turn for its ability. No. When you play it, you bestow a certain amount on it, and then if you can get more gold on it, great, but all the lady characters you control get a strength buff based on that much gold. This can be really dangerous in a Tyrell deck, particularly if you're running All Men Are Fools, but in general, the Tyrell faction has far and away the most and the best lady characters. If you stay in faction, I would say this card is meh. I mean, there's Catelyn and Sansa and Arya, and there's some cheap lady characters, and there's some ones that are good, but Tyrells, I'm telling you, they can use Habber Redwine to search them. They have such good lady characters. If you want to run this card, you should really be doing it in a loyal Tyrell deck, Stark non-loyal deck. I think within its own faction, it's not worth the bestow. The next star card is a location. It's Northern Keep. It is also non-unique, and it is limited. It is one of those types of limited cards that is 2 cost, and you kneel it to get 1 gold or 2 if certain conditions are met. So in the right scenario, this can pay for itself the same turn that you play it, which is ideal. Then after that, you would get more gold every turn than compared to if you had just a Rose Road, for example. But what is this one's condition? It's probably the toughest one to me of all of the ones that I've seen between factions. You get 2 gold if there are more winter than summer plot cards. Now, this basically means you'll get 1 gold. Or you'll get 2 gold if you play a winter plot card, or you'll get 1 gold if you happen to play a winter plot card and they play a summer plot card. This would go well in a dedicated winter deck. You would probably be using winter reserves and then a lot of other winter plot cards. Winter plot cards are good because they have claim. They also have some neutral support in the form of wildlings. And the Starks have no shortage of winter support. One interesting combo I could see you doing with this is using Old Nan, very unique start card, to change a plot card to be winter, which could not only make it so that you could play non-winter plot cards and get this ability, but it would prevent your opponent from stopping you by playing a summer card. They're not really going to go out of their way to play a summer card as like a counter pick, but there's a lot of good summer cards like Trade Routes or Time of Plenty, or even Close Call, one of my personal favorites. So that can happen. So this is honestly not the best econ card I've seen, unless you have a dedicated winter deck. Now, that's a dedicated plot deck archetype. I would not run this card. There are much better econ options. Here's a phenomenal card, High Garden Minstrel. So you'll note immediately that it is not unique, which means you could have several of them out, and it has one of those abilities that can trigger 3 times per round. Those are always great. Anytime you play a song event, which is a pretty common trait for an event to have, there's a lot of neutral ones, there's a lot of Tyrell ones, such as Bear and the Maiden Fair, for instance, very playable for 0 gold, which would net you 1 off of this. In general, it's a common trait that's spread across a lot of factions, and there is some support for them. There's the Night's Watch character Darian, who steals gold when you play song events, and then there's Tom 07's the neutral Brotherhood card. I actually made a Night's Watch Tyrell song focused deck that used Darian and this, and you would preferably want to get several copies of this out, but particularly I could see this being very powerful in a Dark Wings, Dark Words deck, because Dark Wings, Dark Words allows you to draw a card every time you play a event. So getting a gold as well would potentially allow you to play that, which could be another song, and this can keep triggering, especially if you get multiple of these out. I mean, very unique econ system that you can pull out. The problem with Dark Wings, Dark Words is that you can't run more than 1 copy of each event, so your song pool is going to be pretty restricted. But overall, I would say this goes really well with Bear and the Maiden Fair, in particular, just because that's a 0 cost, so you get its effects off, and then you get however much gold is equal to the amount of these that you have out. This is very fun. It's one of those things that supports a trait that's like mildly supported, but has a lot of janky potential for combo decks because the trait appears all over the place. So big fan of this card, but it's certainly not splashable. And now we have the one cost location, Horn Hill. It's at the Reach location, which you'll notice synergizes well with some of the new cards, like I think Randall Tarley, and it's a bestow card. So basically, it's kind of like Sans Maid in that every time you declare a challenge, you can kneel this to give each participating Tyrell character strength equal to the amount of gold that you decided to bestow on it. So it's useless in setup, which is unfortunate, but again, there's a lot of new bestow support. If you play this for 4, then you can win challenges by an absurd amount, which will proc things like Brienne of Tarth. This is really good for Randall Tarley, either version really, because it's at the Reach location, but even the original stands when he gains strength. Giving Tyrell characters strength is always helpful because they like to win challenges alone, or they like to win by a lot, or they just get benefits from getting strength. This is a good alternative way to do it rather than some events and some attachments, and it affects all of them at once, which can get pretty obscene. Unfortunately, the bestow does make it a bit pricey. That can be alleviated by things like Unbridled Generosity and Cersei's Informer, and some of the newer bestow support that can help get gold onto it. But even if this is the only bestow card in your deck, and you can only do 1 or 2, I mean, if you have enough characters to make up for the amount of strength that you're not giving them by leaving out some gold, that's fine. This is totally multiplicative. This seems like a pretty fun card to use, although a little bit redundant considering how many ways Tyrells already have to do something like that. On to Night's Watch, we have an interesting one, Donald Noy. He's unique and he's a steward, and he distinguishes himself from many other stewards by having 2 icons, including the much desired military icon, which can be helpful. He is also a bestow card, and considering that he costs 4, let's just say you fully bestow him just the normal way. That would be 7 gold. That's a lot. And he has a begging brother type effect where you discard a gold from him to do something. Now, it's not once per phase, but what it does is put a weapon attachment into play from your hands. Now, that's kind of cool by giving a lot of weapons ambush, and it's good that weapons are particularly specified because a lot of stewards, including him, have no attachments except weapon. There are things like Miner's Pick and Practice Blade, I guess, that you can use. But the thing is, they have to be kind of expensive or this isn't worth it. It's an extra gold that you paid already. So Practice Blade is 1 cost, but I think it has a 2 cost ambush, so congratulations, you saved 1 gold. But the real target for Donald Noy is Catapult on the Wall. That's a 3 cost attachment, it's a weapon, and it's something that really benefits from having ambush. So you save 2 gold if you use him to put Catapult on the Wall into play. Then you can do that right after attackers are declared and kill something your opponent wasn't expecting. I think that this is basically made for that. I do have a Night's Watch Valyrian Steel deck. I think it's Valyrian Steel. It's the one that lets you sacrifice attachments to play lower cost attachments. That uses this, and that combos really well with At the Palace of Sorrows, which unfortunately has now been restricted to plot deck limit 1 because my old deck used to run 2 copies of that. That is great with surprise catapults, but at the end of the day, a catapult's a catapult. You do save 2 gold on it, but that's assuming you draw into Donald before that and you can afford to do it. Really, not a great card. He combos well with 1 card, and it does make a pretty fun deck, but he doesn't do much with much else. Well, our next card is something that he could do something with. It is a 2-cost weapon, so if you use Donald Noy to put this into play, it's not only an ambush, but you also saved a gold. Attached character gets 1 strength, and you kneel it to choose a defending Night's Watch character. Note that it doesn't have to be the character that it's actually attached to. It does only work, however, as the defending player. So you will kneel it to pick a Night's Watch character that's defending, and then it gets +2 strength. This kind of benefits from the ambush of Donald Noy, and it does provide a passive +1 strength to the person who is equipped with it, who can also be made Night's Watch by Sworn to the Watch if they weren't already, by the way. And it does synergize with the Night's Watch theme of winning as the defensive player, and if your opponent thinks they've finally gotten through and then you do this, you can trigger some other abilities like Shadow Tower. But overall, again, this would not be worth 2 at all compared to some of the options that you have, like the 2-cost Castle Black, unless you're using Donald Noy. It's just deck filler for a Donald Noy Catapult on the Wall deck. It's just another thing you could use his ability on. It's really not a very good card on its own. Again, there are a lot of better ways of doing things like this. For Baratheons, we're starting with a card that has become very strong given recent support. It's Patch Face. Now, not only is there an entire Fool agenda, which allows you to make Fools stronger and things like that, there's immense searchability in the form of, I think, Jingle Bell, and insane support in the form of Shagwell. Patchface was already the one thing that, pun intended, stitched together some semblance of a Fool deck, but now he's great. He gains the same keywords and icons as any Fool. Most Fools have the Insight keyword, and using Shagwell and a few other cards, you can give them a lot more than that. So that is really helpful to have as a passive, and since he's a non-loyal Fool, you can include him in the deck with the new agenda. I think it's called Mummer's Farce, and he can get challenge icons pretty easily, and that's going to be a big deal considering that his strength is going to go up every turn. The new Fool support is hilarious, and Patchface was honestly the best Fool card and Fool support card that existed prior to it, so you know he's going in those decks. Honestly, not a staple in any Baratheon deck, but certainly a staple in a Mummer's Farce deck, so I guess it would be a staple in a Baratheon Mummer's Farce deck. Now on to Baratheons, we have something kind of interesting. It's King's Blood. It's a non-unique attachment, costs 0, which would make it okay in setup, except no, it's a bestow 3 card. But this is really a 3-cost attachment, and if you want to do what it wants to do, it's not bad. You can put it on a bastard, which can be like a 2-cost bastard in hiding or whatever, or you can put it on a king, which is probably the worst option unless you have some way to stand the king, because the downside of this is that you have to kneel attached character and sacrifice this in order to use its ability, which is basically, let's say you bestowed 3, then you would scrap 3 power from your opponent's faction card. That can be helpful if you're using something like Storm's End Maester that wants you to have more power on your faction card than your opponent does, but ultimately, you're kneeling a character, which can be bad for you if you're running too much kneel control that affects you, although you can use Defiance, which does go well in a lot of Baratheon decks. Sacrificing this, which you just bestowed some money onto, and you're getting rid of targets for claim for power challenges. A lot of Baratheon decks like to win power challenges, and I would rather get rid of it from their characters personally than from their faction card. I would like to take it from their faction card and move it onto mine. What would be funny is having this, 1 or 2 of these, and then using some of the new bestow support or some of the old bestow support like Unbridled Generosity to build it up past its normal bestow and then scrap a bunch of power from there. It's also worth noting that since you can start by bestowing it with 3, Favors to the Crown will give it an extra 2 right away if you're running that, although I don't know what kind of Baratheon bestow deck you'd be running, and honestly this isn't even a win condition, it's just kind of a fuck you condition to your opponent. So okay, honestly no, I don't really like this card, but all the bestow cards are worth taking another look at with all the new bestow support that's come out. The Lannisters start off with Jenna Frey. Now, she's a lady, but she's in that awkward middle ground where she's kind of too high cost to sacrifice Fair to the Iron Throne, but too low cost to really search. But she is also the only House Frey card that I know of that's not neutral, which is kind of interesting. If you're using Lords of the Crossing, which is, let me just say, very splashable, so you don't need to do this, but if you want to follow the synergy that it has with the other Frey cards like Walder Frey, and in general, their whole premise of initiating 3 challenges per turn and then getting a big boon on the 3rd one, you can run Lanny's and you can run her, and she synergizes with that. If you win a challenge when she's attacking, and it's the 3rd challenge of the phase, so anything other than military has to be your 3rd challenge, you scrap a card from your opponent's hand, but if you have another House Frey character, which again is really easy to do because they're all neutral other than her, it's 2 cards. Not much to say about her. It's interesting that she is in faction and not neutral and yet supports the House Frey synergy in a very obvious way. She also supports the Lannister synergy of discarding cards, but it's not worth running a whole House Frey engine to do that because the rest of the abilities that the House Frey support cards have in terms of the 3rd challenge don't necessarily have to. So you shouldn't aim for that as your win condition, or your strategy will be a bit mixed. She's an interesting card. Honestly, not a very good one, but it's always cool when you see these traits in factions where you wouldn't expect them. And now we come to the reason that I bought this pack. It's a Lannister 2-cost limited location called the Gold Road. It has a 1 gold modifier, and you can kneel it during the challenges phase to get 1 gold. So basically, this can pay for itself the turn you get it if you have ways to spend gold during the challenges phase. And I'm just going to point out that you don't have to spend it in the challenges phase. It can also contribute towards dominance on a basic level, but you can also save it to use for dominance actions like Walk of Atonement or move it on to Lannisport Treasury, for instance. You can also use it during the challenges phase, and it is telegraphed. Your opponent knows you're going to do this. So it's not exactly like secret gold, but it's more gold that works really, really well in shadow decks in particular. There are so many good Lannister shadow support cards. There's Cersei, there's Bowels of Casterly Rock, there's Tunnels of the Red Keep. Clever Feint is one of the best shadow cards ever, and it's locked in faction. This should be played in 3 copies in any shadow deck because it's guaranteed to pay for itself the turn that you play it, except for setup, but it's also great in setup. It is just so helpful for getting that extra bit of gold during the phase where you really honestly probably need it more than marshaling. That's when most of your action's going to happen. Could also be used in a Clansman deck that relies on ambush and or cards like Hear Me Roar, which are events that will bring things out. But I really think Shadow is what this was made for. However, don't let me discredit it. This card is amazing, super splashable, and just continues to show that the Lannisters are the dominant faction in terms of econ. I guess this is some kind of bestow pack, but whatever. This is Stony Shore Raider to start off the Ironborn. She is actually Ironborn, so you can give her Throwing Axe and a bunch of other random attachments. Also resurrect her with Aeron Damphair if you really want and have the gold to spare, which you might because you would have just won Dominance. But basically, once per turn, you can scrap one of the gold that you may or may not have bestowed on her in order to kneel a location with printed cost 3 or lower. Now, because she's non-unique, you could have multiple copies of her and do that multiple times per round. Depending on your opponent's deck, that may or may not affect their strategy. I mean, kneeling most econ locations wouldn't be great, except for ones we've seen like, okay, the 2 ones from this pack that kneel themselves. If you're the first player, which Ironborn like to be, you can kneel that before your opponent gets a chance to use it. It also has 3 bestows, so again, it could go up to 5 with favors from the crown, but considering that that would not be that helpful because it would have to take place over the course of 5 turns, I wouldn't do that. I think this is a card where you would bestow like once or twice and then probably use it as military fodder. But as I've been saying this whole video, with all the new bestow support, it is worth looking at cards like this again. And another thing that is also relevant now is the Raider trait. There's a lot of support for Raiders now, and a lot of support for Raiders that involves gold. Those cards would synergize well with this because you could play it for freezies, not necessarily bestow it, and then use other cards that have Raider support to put gold onto it. That would be helpful, and that's how I think it would be best run with the new cards. I think its effect can be helpful. It's kind of situational, but it can affect any House of the Red Door target because it doesn't do anything other than kneel it, doesn't try and remove it from play, and any support of the People Search. But bigger cards, now there are a lot more 5-cost locations, and there's always been things like the Wall or even King's Landing. They can't be touched by her, so I think you should just play her for 2 and then use some of the new Raider Bestow support to try and get more gold on her rather than making her a big investment at the beginning. The next Ironborn card is one of those 2-cost events that has like a condition where if you meet it, you can pay a gold to bring it back from your discard pile. What this does is steal attachments from your opponent's discard pile. This is actually really unique. I think this is the only card that can do this. I've seen ways where Night's Watch can take characters. Ironborn Greyjoys have the ability to steal a lot of locations. Pretty sure nothing can steal events, but this can steal attachments. That's pretty interesting, and it doesn't have to be on a character you control. So generic ones like Milk of the Poppy, which are also terminal, this isn't useless on. The condition to pay 1 gold to bring it back is just winning an unopposed challenge. Now, a lot of decks can do that, but Greyjoy in particular have a lot of stealth, so you would put this, I guess, in a stealth deck, but also in a pillage deck because you'd want them to have attachments. Again, this depends on the matchup, but there are splashable enough attachments like Milk of the Poppy, mostly Milk of the Poppy, that you would be willing to take no matter what. And then there would be cool occasions where you could take something sick like Oathkeeper, and then turns out your deck is half Tyrell and you can search with that. Sometimes they'll just give you a cool attachment. Other times it'll be like Night's Watch character only and you can't actually use it. But it's an interesting card. Frankly, I think most of these events that return to your hand when you pay a gold after you meet a certain condition aren't really worth their 2 costs, because 2 cost is a little bit bulky if you're not running an event focused deck. Saving 2 from marshaling, especially if you somehow don't meet this condition, that would suck. But this one's pretty cool. Next up, we have a classic. It's called Freedman. It's the first Targaryen card. It's an ally, so it's searchable with Streets of Silk. It's non-unique, so you can have several of them. And it's just really helpful because Targaryens, more than any other faction, I'm looking at you, his Darzo Larak, like to discard cards from their hand. And in doing that, it is a cost that decreases the size of your hand. So you want to focus on discarding cards that have abilities that benefit from that. The best one is Missandei, who just comes right into play when she's discarded. There's also a version of Jorah, who enters Shadow when he's discarded. And then there's Freedman, which doesn't do anything immediately when it's discarded. But if you win a challenge by 5 or more, then you can put Freedman into play. That's a way to get them back that basically makes this, like discarding a Freedman, more like discarding half a card than discarding a card. Not actually as common as I expected when I built my discard deck, that you get to summon Freedman. Or maybe it's just that I kept forgetting to summon Freedman. But this is really good. This is just a very splashable type of cannon fodder for your cards that discard cards from your hand as ammo. And you can bring them back, particularly if you're running a Prince That Was Promised deck, which already wants to win by 5 or more strength. And that agenda goes very well with Targaryens because Daenerys Targaryen is so important. So this is overall a very good card. Okay, this next one's a 2-cost attachment called Warrior's Braid. It's an item, so it's searchable with Street of Steel. Kind of weird that it depicts Daenerys Targaryen on it because its effect has to do with winning military challenges, but we'll get to that in a second. So you have to put it on a Targaryen character. Then they get Renown, which is nice. It's always good to have an attachment that gives Renown. And they get +1 strength for every token on this braid, which basically gets a token every time you win a military challenge with the attached character. This will make military cards stronger and stronger. You can use cards like Khal Drogo or a lot of Dothraki to do some damage with this, and it is non-unique. And now that I'm thinking about it, obviously it's made for Dothraki because it's called Warrior's Braid. But the problem is that a big source of military in Targaryen decks does come from Drogon. He's the big dragon with the military icon, and dang, can he do some removal. He has no attachments, so this would not help him. But if you're running a Dothraki deck, which I haven't experimented with much, but seems very powerful in terms of military. There's ways to get extra military challenges and extra claim, which can really just reap your opponent's board down. This would be helpful for getting Renown and just souping something up. 2 is a little bit steep, but considering this is the faction that has the broken, even when eroded card, Gifts for the Widow that can just search out any attachment, you can frankly just play this in the middle of the challenges phase and get a secret Renown and win secretly, and your opponent won't expect it. This is an okay card. I haven't made a Dothraki deck, so I don't know, but if I did, I'd probably toss in 1 copy. On to our final faction, Dorne. We start off with Dornish Spy. I really like this card. It's a spy which has anti-support from Cersei's Informant, but I think there might be a couple of new cards that support Spy, and it has Ambush 4, which is best because you want to use its ability during the challenges phase to remove an icon from something, so you're going to want to ambush it rather than play it. So this really costs 4. But what you can do, which you can do with, frankly, a lot of Dornish cards from before the Shadow era that have ambush on them, such as Areo Hota, for instance, what you can do is use the agenda Assault from the Shadows and then place this into Shadow artificially. Then it'll regain its printed cost, and you can bring it out for 3 instead of 4 in the challenges phase. Assault from the Shadows works really well with Dorne because they have a lot of these ambush cards like this, and this is a really excellent, non-unique way to get rid of challenges icons, which is really an effective strategy that Dorne is very good at, particularly if you put this in a Shadow and you have the Shadow version of Arianne Martell out, for example. You bring this out, it gets rid of a challenge icon, then so does Arianne, and that can keep happening. You can basically go second every time, so you can get 2 gold from Dornish Fiefdom and then get rid of your opponent's ability to do anything, including block when it's finally your turn to go. This strategy is super effective, and this card is really good in that it's non-unique and you can run several copies of it. It's a way you can, use your gold in the middle of the challenges phase, but I do think it works best in an Assault from the Shadows deck because it's not the only card of its kind that would benefit from coming out of Shadows for its printing cost rather than paying its ambush cost. Okay, I've literally never used this card, but it's a 3-cost terminal attachment, which is never good. And it basically just waits till next turn because it's when the marshalling phase begins. And if you're playing this, it's already begun. The character goes back to its owner's hand, can't be saved. This goes to your graveyard. This is pretty expensive. You'd have to play it on a pretty hefty cost character. And unfortunately, all the dragons and armies which have no attachments, so you can't use this on, are hefty cost characters. So you'd really need to use it more on like a high cost lord or lady or king. I don't know about it. It's non-unique, which I guess you could play 2 in 1 turn, but who even cares? It's terminal. This is not my favorite Dornish attachment. The Dornish attachments are amazing as a pool of cards. And this one I've never used before, but I suppose if you want to return it to their hand and then have a chance to do an intrigue challenge, that's one weird form of removal. This is just very, very pricey unless you use Water Gardens, which would basically probably make it free. A cool anti-combo you could do with this is use it on your own card because it's after marshalling begins, so there's no way that it would really dodge a board wipe. But I don't know, let's say you have an attachment on your character and you want to move it onto something else, use it on your card as the most expensive way to get the attachment back in your hand. There is the combo of the day. The neutrals are starting off strong with the blazing sword wielding 7-costing Beric Dondarrion. He's a knight. He gets knight support from Tourney for the King and from Hedge Knight. He's a lord, so you can summon him with Heir to the Iron Throne, but you don't do that. He's a roller, so you can use him in a Baratheon deck and along with Melisandre or Red God's Blessing or something. He has renown, and basically when you summon him, you put 6 kiss tokens on him. That does mean you have to kiss the card 6 times, and your opponent has to sit there while you do it. Then, when he would be killed, you can get rid of a kiss token to save him. This effectively makes him immune to targeted removal. It makes him immune to Valor Morghulis, but not all board wipes because a lot of them say cannot be saved. It makes him free military fodder. However, he does get weaker every time that happens. That's not really a big deal, but again, his cost is really high, and you have to marshal him to get his abilities, so you can't cheat him out with Heir to the Iron Throne. Of course, Lord is also supported. In this case, it would be very redundant to use a lot of the Lord support, like Bodyguard or Disputed Claim, but at least you could use Noble Cause, the plot card, to bring him out for 5 instead of 7. He's just very expensive, and it's hard to cheat him out. But now there is new Brotherhood support. They have Lady Stoneheart, who can be brought back with his Kiss tokens, which is super helpful and honestly a great bit of balanced lore synergy, which I always love. So I think this card used to be kind of meh as the top dog of the Brotherhood faction, but now he's better. Put him in a Brotherhood without banners deck. I'd talk more about that, but I expect it's coming up because it's the name of the pack. And the final neutral card is an absolutely legendary card. I didn't even know it was in this pack, but I can't wait to have more copies. It's a 0-cost event called Unbridled Generosity. 0-cost events are always amazing. If you're using Tower of the Sun or Dark Wings, Dark Words, that could get you a gold or a draw respectively. But what this does is insane. It can give you gold directly because it puts 1 gold and up to 3 cards. Now this is cards, not characters. So the obvious one is to put it on the Iron Bank. That will double the rate at which the Iron Bank accelerates, or you could just play this for 0, put it on the Iron Bank, and then spend it. Just basically generate a gold. You can also put it on Cersei's Informer, which you could then move on to the Iron Bank. You could put it on Lannisport Treasury. Those are just ways that it can get you econ. There's a million bestow cards in the world, and if you're using the new Free Companies agenda and you're using a bunch of bestow cards, like a bunch of ones we've even seen in this pack, you can just stuff gold across your board. It is a little annoying that you can't allocate, and I emphasize a little, the gold to be 2 on one character, 1 on one, or 3 on another. That would make this card busted. I still think, frankly, this card should cost 1, but for 0 cost, this is a staple 3 of if you're using the new agenda, or even if you're not, if you're using a bestow based deck, although that's kind of hard if you're not using the bestow agenda. But like staple 3 of, seriously. It's also really good in the fool deck where you want to give all the fools that have gold on them the same keywords and challenge icons or whatever as the one who does that. So honestly, just one of the best, no, I'll say it, this is the best bestow support card that was ever made before the new cards were printed. Okay, now we have an agenda, the Brotherhood without banners. So the restriction is you can't include loyal characters in your deck. That is a big restriction, but it's not as insane as the Free Folk agenda, which is just you can't include non-neutral characters in your deck. That agenda is hilarious because whatever faction card you pick literally is meaningless and it's just a gesture towards that faction. This one, the faction you pick does matter. Before I even look at the reaction, this deck building restriction is going to tell you that what you're going to want to do for sure with your deck is run the Hollow Hill, like probably 3 copies. That is an amazing location that lets you search the top 10 cards of your deck for any non-loyal character if you don't have any. The only thing stopping it from being constantly used is that a lot of the best cards in certain decks are loyal. Sometimes it's worth it to either not run loyal characters or just even run Hollow Hill just until you get it, because it's that good of a searcher. But in this deck where you have no loyal characters, it will always be active, and if you get that out during setup, like every single turn you're going to get to search the top 10 cards of your deck for any character you want. So right away put that in. And then the reaction is it's a faction kneeler, so don't run a lot of faction kneeling cards, but you can pick any neutral character you want, and then you can give it either stealth, insight, renown, or intimidate, which I would say are probably the best 4 keywords, although some might make a case for prize. All of these are great. You need more cards, you pick insight. You're having trouble getting through your opponent's defenses, you pick stealth. You want to kneel some of your opponent's shit, you pick intimidate. Or if you just want to get close to the win condition, you pick renown. I don't have to tell you that these are good keywords. They are. You have to pick a neutral character though, which is fine because you're going to be running a lot of the neutral Brotherhood cards. Angai the Archer, for instance, is one of the most splashable cards in this game. He's a 2-cost, and he doesn't kneel in a military challenge if you don't have other loyal characters. You're definitely going to be running him because you don't have any loyal characters. You are also going to be playing Ghost of High Heart, which is neutral because that gives all your non-loyal characters +1 if you have no loyal characters. Basically, a lot of the Brotherhood cards, I also Lemon Cloak, and I think maybe Thoros of Mir, they all support this non-loyal idea, so obviously the agenda named after them is going to as well. You're going to include a lot of those, maybe even Beric Dondarrion, who ironically doesn't have any support for non-loyal, so he is the most leave-outable of the Brotherhood cards in a deck that's running this. But yeah, I just actually finished reconstructing mine. I did a Baratheon roller Hollow Hill deck because a lot of the Brotherhood cards are also roller cards, so there's a little bit of obvious synergy there. But man, that's just because I was lazy. If you actually look at the non-loyal card pool of each faction and make like an educated decision, that would be sick. The one thing that is a little weird about this card is that, you know, it's a faction dealer, which is annoying of a cost considering the deck building restriction already, but it gives you a lot of options, but it's hard to make a defined win condition when you're designing your deck around something that can once per turn give one thing, one of 4 keywords. It might be best to focus on 1 or 2 of those keywords, or just try and generally overpower your opponent. But it is a little difficult to come up with a concrete win condition with such a broad ability. And our final card will be the plot card Favors from the Crown. Now this is the Bestow plot card. It has pretty solid stats, at least in terms of gold. The initiative is middle of the road. It's a Kingdom plot card, so it does benefit from Stone Drum, but it does get fucked over by naval superiority. It has a very simple ability. Anytime a card with Bestow enters play, put a gold on it. So even if you don't bestow it, it'll automatically get 1. If you do, it'll get 1 more. And if it has 3 gold, put 2 gold on it. So if you are looking at some of the cards we were looking at from this pack, like most notably, I would think Lady Sansa's Handmaid or whatever, you can give it an extra 2 gold. In that case, it would be 5. It would be insane. Sometimes it doesn't make a huge difference. Like on Stony Brook, Raider or whatever, you're giving them more ammo, but if they're already restricted to once per phase or once per turn, it's really just, it's going to last you so far ahead in the game that it's probably not worth thinking about. But there are cards that we have seen, and there are certainly new cards, and there is always the Iron Bank that benefit just in general from having more gold on them at any given time. I wouldn't say this necessarily goes in every bestow deck, but it probably goes in most, considering it has a safe amount of gold. Even if you're not planning to get the extra 2 by bestowing 3, which is tempting because the card seems to want you to, just having an extra 1 gold on things, it ups the cap a little bit. Like Ricasso, all of a sudden now, his normal maximum bestow is 2, and you wish you could bestow him with more because there would be more plot cards in your use pile, but now he would have 3. And then you could use Unbridled Generosity and a bunch of other stuff. It's just a good card for letting you play your bestow cards for pretty cheap and then getting auto bestowed, and then that lasting you long enough to use a lot of the new bestow support to give them more gold so that they don't run out of ammo for their effects. And thus concludes another video. I hope you guys enjoyed this pack opening, and for the sake of brevity, I'm going to end the video immediately from here. Bye-bye.